The announced topic was, is Torah a cult? We used to ask it in terms of the Baal Tshuva movement particularly, but you can ask it across the board. About 40 years ago, the Israeli government wanted to pass a law against cults in this country, but they wanted to make sure that they could write the law in such a way as not to criminalize the Baal Tshuva movement. So they sent representatives from the Israeli Justice Department to the various Baal Tshuva yeshivas to ask them for advice. How should they frame the law? How should they define what a cult is? So as to include the ones like Scientology and the Moonies and others that they wanted to attack and not be required by the law to attack the Baal Tshuva movement as well. This sparked a discussion in Ohr Somayach and other places to think about the question. Looking up cult in the various sources for definitions isn't too helpful. The last time I checked, they weren't particularly consistent. And one defined a cult as any movement with strong allegiance that's less than 100 years old, which meant that the only thing that could avoid being a cult is being over 100. And I'll tell you what we came up with at the end, but I'd like to take you through the process of the effort, because I think it's very instructive. What we found is that if you try to describe a cult as a movement that produces certain effects on its members, very often you'll find that those very same effects are produced by institutions that you don't want to call cults. So it becomes harder and harder to isolate the specific qualities that you want to use to define cults. Now, we started with an assumption that the purpose of defining cult is not to aid the dictionary makers, but to isolate what's objectionable about these movements. If you do some creative language assessing, whereby you define cult as producer of apple pies or something that's perfectly legitimate, then we felt you have failed in your task. Whether people's uses are consistent or aren't consistent, the purpose of defining cult is to define something that's evil so that it can be criminalized and attacked and destroyed. So what we need to look at is, what is it about these groups that we find objectionable and worthy of rational condemnation? So here's a simple example. What about a group that radically changes the values of the people who join it? Typically, nothing will work every time, but typically changes the values of the people who join it very substantially. Well, it could be argued that if that's the feature that's objectionable to you, then we should shut down the universities. And I don't just mean now, when the universities are crazy. But even in the 70s, when I was involved in universities, it was very common for students to come to the university with certain values and to have them radically changed by the activities in the university. And I don't just mean the fraternities and sororities. I mean the courses, especially since a sizable number of the professors made it their purpose to be iconoclastic and to overwhelm the students with the ignorance of their backgrounds and so on and so on. If the production of a substantial change in one's values is going to be the objectionable feature, then the universities are definitely going to qualify. And I think most people would say, well, I don't want to include universities in this category that I want to condemn and criminalize. What about demanding commitment and loyalty? Demanding commitment and loyalty. It's true, cults do that, but typically so do political parties. And again, even 40 years ago, when things weren't as crazy as they are today. What about the football team? They'll tell you have to change your diet, give up smoking, exercise in ways that certainly are not physically pleasant, get a certain amount of sleep at night. Isn't that a commitment? Isn't that loyalty? And if somebody cheats on the rules, the team will turn against him. Do you really want to say football teams are cult-like and objectionable and so on and so on? Probably not. What about making a heavy demand on your resources, on your money? Well, let's consider a charity effort where, in order to be an effective fundraiser, you have to lead the pack rather than ordering from the back, like the commanders in the Israeli army. That's why the casualties are always so high among the commanders, because they lead from the front. They don't lead from the back. Someone, or save the planet, or where the expectation in joining the group is that you really believe in it and you're really committed to it, and therefore you're willing to sacrifice for it, go to jail for it, certainly to give up your resources. Now, I'm sure there are some who would think that some of the Save the Planet groups are cults, so maybe they wouldn't find that objectionable. But what about building a new hospital? What about curing a disease? What about going in the Peace Corps, which maybe you haven't heard of because it's not as popular as it used to be. Young people used to devote 2 years of their lives to go to Africa, to go to Asia, starving countries, to help people spread whatever knowledge they have and actually physically help people in the villages. That's a pretty sizable commitment and sacrifice. Does that make the Peace Corps into a cult? What about changing the trajectory of your life, let alone your values, but just changing what you're going to do, what you're going to be? Not necessarily what's good for the world, what's good for you. When a person goes to university, let's say from age 18 to 22, he's young, impressionable, dreadfully ignorant, has little self-control, and therefore he's certainly a candidate for saving the planet, 100%. And all sorts of other glorious activities. But let's be a little less grandiose than that. His father and grandfather were dentists, and he's planning to be a dentist, and he decides to write literature. If you have an institution that has that kind of effect on people, often, should we call that a cult, objectionably, and make it illegal? Again, universities very often do that. People who are interested in criminalizing cults typically are not interested in closing down the universities. Again, I'm not making recommendations one way or the other. In our present circumstances, I think closing down the universities, many of them, would be a great idea. But these features were available in universities even in the 70s, and then nobody was thinking of closing down the universities. So the challenge is to figure out what to say about cults, which isn't equally applicable of organizations and institutions that we don't want to attack. How about loyalty to a key figure? Loyalty to a key figure. Willing to sacrifice your judgment to a key figure. Well, certainly, if you're in any scientific discipline, there are the leaders of the discipline. if you don't sacrifice your judgment to them, especially before you get your PhD, you won't get a PhD. Does that mean that it's cult-like and objectionable? That you shouldn't think for yourself? I mean, you could think for yourself, just don't believe what you think. But if you believe what you think against these authority figures, then you'll simply be rejected and dismissed from the activity. Does that make them objectionable? What happens if these people have revolutionized the field? What happens if they regularly refute their critics? What happens if they're still continuing to make discoveries and inventions? Isn't it appropriate to defer to them? Isn't it appropriate to rethink your view 100 times before you decide that they're wrong and they're right? After all, they got where they got in a competition of other people who would have displaced them if they could. They just weren't able. So, accepting the authority of someone and deferring to his judgment and making a decision on his basis, who do you want to determine the rules of surgery in a hospital? Every new MD who's hired should make his own rules? You won't tolerate that. You wouldn't go to a hospital that had those kinds of rules. Why not? Why shouldn't you think freely? Because he hasn't got the expertise that the person at the top of the ladder has. So again, the fact that you have a group where there's a leader or leaders, and everyone in the group is supposed to defer their judgment to the leaders, that can't be the objectionable feature of cults. Because if it were, then these types of disciplines would also be objectionable. And typically people don't think that they are. So that's the challenge that we were set 40 years ago. Try to figure out what it is about these organizations which deserve the condemnation of being a cult and the opposition that it's appropriate to show to cults, which won't thereby endanger other organizations and institutions that we want to preserve. Okay, is the problematic clear? Now, we came up with two features which I still think are the two features. If you think of others that I haven't thought of, you mention them, I may change my definition, put more in. But the two features were fraud and coercion. Fraud means that they either lie about what it is they're promoting, or they hide so much of what it is they're promoting that, in effect, they willfully create a wrong impression about what they're promoting, so that the person who's deciding whether or not to join or even to experiment can't make an informed decision. And coercion is where either strictly with a gun to the head or through social coercion, you deprive the person of certain resources that, again, are necessary for his general health and for his decision-making ability to evaluate. And we found that the groups that we were trying to oppose, the Israeli government was trying to oppose, violate these two rules regularly. And we told the representatives of the Israeli Justice Department, as far as we knew, no one engaged in the Kiruv effort violated those two rules. So I'll give you an example. One fellow who was at the yeshiva told me he was walking on King George Street and he was stopped by a stranger. Now he's an American. The fellow who stopped was also American. He says, "Hi, you new to Israel?" "Yeah." "How long have you been here?" 3 weeks. "How do you like it?" "Oh, I like this, I like this, I like this." "How about buying things in a store. How do you like that? Now, this was 30 years ago. So you can read about this history books. Oh, that's a challenge, Rabbi. I'm not a challenge. It's not Rabbi. It's a friend. Challenge. Because there are no lines, and people push, and they cut ahead, and everything else. Yeah, that's right. Israeli society is kind of rough and kind of disrespectful. And how about the general cleanliness of the streets? Oh, it could be improved. And the guy on the street says to him, you know something? You feel the way a lot of other people feel. And we have a group. There's a group that gets together to try to work together to improve certain aspects of Israeli society. Politeness and respect and cleanliness, and preserve the environment. Would you like to see how we operate? Sure, why not? Okay, we're having a meeting at this and this place, and this time. You're invited. Well, it was the Moonies, hello. He's not going to tell him that we're going to make you into a follower of the Reverend Moon, and in the end you're going to be smoking drugs and reciting his inane, trash. I'm not going to tell him that. So they tell him we're to reform, Israeli society, something which would appeal to a nice, normal, fair-minded American, and then they'll introduce him to the upper-ups down the road, when he's already inside. That kind of fraud is very, very common, where they do not tell you what they really believe in, what they're really committed to, and in that way they disarm you and make it impossible for you to make an informed decision. Coercion works like this. I don't know if you saw, there was a film called A Ticket to Heaven about a guy who gets involved in a cult. Of course, he's Jewish. Poor guy, he broke up with his girlfriend, and he was vulnerable. So they tell him, we're having a convention at a hotel in the mountains, and you're invited. All expenses paid. Terrific. Why not? He gets there. His cell phone doesn't work because they've blocked access. There are no public phones. For the 3 days that he's there, there's no transportation. No buses coming in, no buses going out. The only people at the hotel are the people in this group. So he's entirely cut off. That's coercion. Or the food that they feed you, high carbohydrate and low protein. And sleep deprivation. Some of the most important sessions are from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. So he's sleep deprived, malnourished, and totally cut off. He hears something he likes, he doesn't like, he can't Google it, can't look it up, can't call somebody and ask. No, he's cut off. So they have his attention completely. And if it's a boy, they use girls. If it's a girl, they use boys. Also to undermine them. I guess that's, for some groups, a little out of date the way I said it, but too bad. That's coercion, where you don't have control of your circumstances and you're subject to influences that you would not have chosen for yourself. Can't turn your back. You can't walk away. What are you going to do? Walk into the mountains alone, not knowing where you are, no maps, no compasses, nothing? Now, the examples I'm giving you are extreme, but you can have lesser forms of it. You are invited to join a certain institution for an educational program, and you're told, this is an all-expense paid program for 4 weeks. But listen, we're paying your room and board. We're supporting you totally. So the commitment is 13 hours a day. Morning, afternoon, and evening. And of course that means lectures and discussions and reading and quizzes and so forth and so on for 4 weeks. 13 hours a day. Well, maybe there's nobody standing at the door with a gun. And maybe not it's off on the mountains, but you came. You don't have anything else to do for the time. They told you total room support, so you didn't bring money. You may not have access to money. You're sort of stuck. And by totally occupying something called information overload, if you program a person with too much information to process, then he gets to a point where he can't think it through, and very often what he does is he just listens and takes it on board. It's too much, too fast, without any discussion, just being fed it. But that's a milder form of coercion. It's not as extreme as taking a person off into the mountains and isolating him, but it is also a kind of coercion. Now, you can make up the other applications as well. For example, fraudulent literature. You have books that are written, and in the book it says, the Bible says this, and Mao Zedong says that, and Karl Marx says that. Do you Google the passages and look them up and check? Well, you're reading the book, and the next hour is another subject. There's another lecture, and so on and so on. Did they really say that? You don't know. Maybe they made it up. How would you tell? So that's another kind of fraud, where they lie to you about the information that they're giving to you. The New York Times was explaining its methodology of arriving at its conclusions. And they said, well, we check our figures with the health services in Gaza. They don't even mention that they're all institutions of Hamas themselves, the guys who murdered and raped and everything, and so on and so on. And we cross-check them with the United Nations. Wow, that's really objective. That's got the facts on the ground, right? And they're not embarrassed to tell their readers that. Talk about fraud. So when you have institutions which practice fraud and or coercion of these kinds, that's definitely objectionable. And these cults typically do. So that being the case, they qualify as objectionable. Now, when we came to these criteria in discussion, we took a look at what's going on here at the Joyous Light Institute. Well, let's see. If you want to come in as a beginner, you are absolutely required. Well, that's not true. Nobody checks up and nobody really worries about it. You're required to have 7 hours per day of participation. The rest of the hours are free. Last time I checked, that would be 17 free hours a day out of 24. That doesn't sound like you're locked up in a coop. And your cell phones work here. And at the street corner, you can buy newspapers, and you can go into town and get whatever you want, good things and bad things included. Right? Certainly doesn't sound like you're isolated. Certainly doesn't sound like you're cut off and compelled in any way. 7 hours a day ought not to be information overload, though, given current limitations on the capacities of students, maybe it is a little rough. But some of the time it's discussion. It's not just being talked at or talked to. So that makes it somewhat less coercive. And of course, you can Google whatever you want. You can communicate with whatever you want. You could even ask ChatGPT about it and get the current false information from there. And of course, nobody's forced in here. And as far as presenting what we believe in, well, if I'm speaking now about the beginners program, because that's where the Kirov is done. 2 flights down the stairs, you have the base medrash. Sitting there are the people who are the graduate students, the ones who are in advanced studies. Talk to them. Ask them what they're doing, why they're doing it. You find out. You go to families for Shabbos, and these families are part of the population into which students at this institution are being introduced. Talk to them, see how they live. Quiz them on why they do what they do, why they don't do what they do. You're invited to do that. We have a service that sets people up with families for Shabbos and holidays, so that we are certainly not hiding what we believe in. We have books in the English library that describe the lives of people whom we regard as exemplars, and those are their lives. And for some people, those lives are horrifying, but that's what they are, and that's where we put them. So there's certainly no instance of fraud here where we're misrepresenting either by positive description or by withholding information. We're not creating a false impression as to what it is we are recommending. Then you have regular question and answer sessions where people are invited to ask any question which is on their mind. Now, I know from the testimony of our students that this is a very unfamiliar situation where you can ask any question you want with no fear of penalty. No one is going to criticize you. No one is going to penalize you. No one is going to give you dislikes on your Facebook page. They're not going to mob you. You ask the question, you get an answer, you can discuss it, you can debate it. Like the question for tonight's shir, is Judaism a cult? It's a question that we raise. That's a question that's up for discussion. We have people coming in, especially in the beginners program, who will say, isn't religion just a cult for weak-minded people, or people who can't face death, or people who can't make their own decisions? That's a fair question. No one will laugh at you if you ask that question. Between you and me, it's not a smart question. But okay, no one will laugh at you, and they'll take you seriously, and they'll answer the question for you. First of all, and what about saying that being an atheist is a crutch for a weak person who doesn't want to have a disturbed life, doesn't want to justify himself, doesn't want to have to decide whether what he's doing is right or wrong. Don't tell me what to do. Don't push me around. I do as I please, so I don't have to think about what I'm doing. So I don't have to worry about self-criticism. So I don't have to worry about looking at myself in the mirror. Only weak-minded people who can't stand living up to self-criticism and changing your mind and seeking something that's challenging, atheism is only a crutch for such people. And of course, both positions are wrong. There are strong atheists and weak atheists, and there are strong religious people and weak religious people. For weak people, things can function as crutches. For strong people, they function as challenges. The opposite of a crutch. But if you ask the question, it will be answered. It will be answered straight without putting you under any pressure. So, as in terms of the ability to discuss openly and critically, we're like the university was 40 years ago, where it really was a clearinghouse for ideas, and you could say and think what you want, and say, I read this over here and I read that over there, and people would discuss and debate it because they were interested in finding out what was true. The university 40 years ago weren't perfect either, but night and day compared to what's going on today. And in the yeshiva, you have it. So it definitely doesn't sound at all like a cult. Then we have the experiences that people have had to come and challenge us. There was an institution for women which used to be partners with us, and I became independent, Rabbi Yerushalayim, and the fellow whose daughter got involved in Rabbi Yerushalayim, got involved in Jewish practice. So maybe it's still going on today, but in those days there were courses to train you in cult busting. You got a child that's involved in a cult, we'll give you 3 months of training how to deal with the cult, and then you can go, and with our help and with our training, you have a good chance of getting your child out. Okay, so the father went to this cult busting course, and he comes to Yerushalayim, He comes to meet his daughter. And the first rule about cult busting was, see if you can get some time with your child alone, out of the cult premises. He says, would you like to go traveling with me in the Galil? Sure, Dad. Let's rent a car and go. I'll take off a week and we'll go. Oh, that was too easy. Then see if you can attend some of the secret cult sessions. Could I sit in on some of your classes? Sure, Dad. We'll arrange it. We'll be glad to have you there. See if you can have a meeting with the charismatic personality who's the influencer of the cult. I won't mention his name, the fellow from England who started Yerushalayim much, but charismatic? I wouldn't describe him that way. He's very intelligent, he's a nice guy, but he's not going to charm you or sweep you off your feet. You know what the result was? The result was her father went home and made his house kosher. So far from his being a cult, he realized that this is an open educational institution. It models its format and its structure on university-style education, just as Ohr Somayach does, and it's a matter of an open intellectual inquiry. We have had parents. It isn't as popular today as it was 20 or 30 years ago, but parents have come here, and couples have sat in on the lectures and so on, and some come ready to do battle. But since, number one, we are open, and number two, we are interested in fair discussion, and number three, we have some pretty highly trained people here. They found that the atmosphere was more pleasant than they anticipated, and the answers that they got were far more competent than they ever dreamed. You've heard Rabbi Breitowitz, you know what a real scholar is. And I spent time as a university professor, and there are other people who are really top-notch here. So the taste of the institution, the actual experience of the institution, is where a person can get a first-hand impression, and we welcome that. We're very happy if people come and participate and raise any questions that are on their minds and criticize in any way that they please. From time to time, observations are made which lead us to improve the way we do things. But usually, there's so much false pseudo-information about how yeshivas and other places like this function that it's not difficult to correct the misimpression. Now, as I said, the state sent its representatives here to formulate the law. As far as I know, the law never went into effect. I don't know why that was. But it was very, very, very beneficial for us that we had this discussion, because we clarified for ourselves our own ideas about the subject. Again, we don't have the draw of kibbutz has become much, much diminished. They're not nearly as popular and attractive as they used to be. But we used to have students here who regularly, on the weekends, went to kibbutz. They didn't keep Shabbos, and we don't require them to keep Shabbos. And they would come back. And several times the students said, gee, we were told at the university that you're a cult. I said, really? Well, the next time you go back, ask them this question. Why is it that our students go to them for Shabbos, but none of their members ever come to us for Shabbos? Why is that? None of them has any interest? Or during the weekday for a class. Doesn't it sound like their actions and their participation is restricted, either formally or by the social pressure of the group, whereas we don't restrict ours? Which one is the cult-like behavior? Don't step out of our dalaramas, out of our environment. Don't dare step into somebody else's environment. Isn't that what the cult teaches? Sounds to me like the kibbutz is the cult in this pair, and that we are the open, because we're happy to have them go to kibbutz. One of the reasons we're happy to have them go to kibbutz is because our consistent experience is that 9 times out of 10 they'll end up here. they won't end up there. And one of the reasons is because we present an open, critical, inclusive atmosphere. They get their questions answered, and they feel satisfied that they have something they can rely on, something that's solid. And the kibbutz doesn't give them that. Kibbutz gives them a party line, and don't stray from the party line. So of course they end up here. Same thing is true, by the way, students who are here and want to go to India or to Thailand, often enough they were on their way to India. They got waylaid here. They allowed a plane and ran out of fuel or something. And they ended up here. And then they decided to take off a month and 2 months and became 6 months, became a year. But part of them thinks, but I didn't get to India. Typically, we tell them, go. Go. Because our experience is, you'll be back. We know very well that what you're going to hear in India, unless you have certain psychological weaknesses and so forth and so on, we're not psychologists, we can't judge that. But otherwise, you won't stay there. You won't stay there. It doesn't have the reality and depth and comprehensiveness that Torah has. And that being the case, you're not going to end up there. One of the famous Jewish authors alive today is a woman who spent 13 years in an ashram in America. A believing, devoted ashram member. And then found her way out of it. She became a best-selling author. Extremely intelligent. She has a whole workshop for marriage counseling. She wrote a bestseller called Holy Woman. So I would strongly recommend. So somebody wants an example of someone who knows that side well from the inside after 13 years of it, and then decided that that wasn't where the real truth lies. We have people like that. Okay, so now, given all of this, I think the final question, given where we're living today, is what to do when you're faced with a cult. If you're in university and you're surrounded by cult-like activity, and if you're Jewish, so then you can be attacked on those grounds. What to do? Now, I'm going to give you suggestions that work as long as they don't put a gun to your head. I'm not recommending that anyone put himself in danger. I wouldn't feel that the person who disguised himself and didn't reveal his Judaism was doing something wrong. You don't have to die to oppose or reform people in these kinds of psychologically sick and politically vicious groups. But there are things that can be done. If you have a support group and you feel you're not in danger, then you can identify. And if somebody confronts you, so then it depends on what kind of confrontation the person is looking for. If the person has a bullhorn and just wants to yell at you, walk away, close your ears, and don't respond. If he's just talking, then let him talk. Doesn't have to bother you. If he challenges you and is willing to keep quiet, then you have to make a decision. And this will depend upon how you know this person or the group that he represents. There are two ways to oppose what someone tells you. One is to try to show that it's wrong, and the other is to show that he has no reason to think it's right, though it might be right as far as you know. It's just that he has no reason to think that it's right. So, for example, someone's on a news program, and he recites things that information he's giving to the public, and somebody says, did you know that he's been convicted in court for perjury? Oh, he's been convicted in court for perjury. Well, that certainly means I shouldn't trust him. Now, what he's saying may be right, but I can't take it from him because he's not reliable. Guy comes to you and he says, here's a source for what I'm saying. See this encyclopedia? It says it right here in the encyclopedia that I'm right. And you say, could I look at that book for a moment? Sure, here, take it. Take it, open it up to the publication date, 1953. Oh, says it in the Encyclopedia of 1953. Golly, I don't think that's a convincing source. It now being 2023, the next couple of hours. Maybe it's right, but surely I wouldn't base myself on a 70-year-old encyclopedia. It's just not it's not credible. Now, a person says, for example, you take Holocaust denial. They say, but there are so many people, and there's so many testimonies, and there's so many books, and there are videos, and they're lying, they've been tricked, they didn't know, they were in distress, and so forth and so on. One way you can deal with such a person is say to him, do you believe in the First World War? First World War. You do? Why? How many people did you meet who were there? How many books did you read? Isn't war stressful? Maybe it was greatly exaggerated. Maybe it wasn't 4 years, it was only 2 years or a year and a half. Maybe there weren't millions, just hundreds. Did anybody see all the millions? No? So, but you believe in the First World War? Why? Why do you think you have better reason for believing in the First World War than in the Holocaust? You attack him on his internal consistency. Don't try to overwhelm him with external facts. Attack him on his internal consistency. Or on his ignorance. You surely have heard, they did a survey. How many people know what are the river and the sea? Palestine free from river to sea. Which river and which sea? 50% of the people who say it don't know which river and which sea. Then there's a guy named Ami Horowitz, who's a genius, who does videos of interviews with college students. And here's what he did. He pretended to have a petition to be signed in favor of Gaza and to contribute money for Gaza and so forth and so on. And they said, would you sign a petition in favor of the residents of Gaza? Of course. Now he says, now the rules for my institution, I have to tell you what's in the petition. And one of the things it says in the petition, we are petitioning to support the people of Gaza who take homosexuals and throw them off roofs to kill them. You want to sign, please? I mean, right here. You sign right here. What do they do? They throw homosexuals off roofs to kill them? Yeah, you can read about it. Yeah, that's what they do. They don't tolerate that there. Oh, I don't think I could sign that. No, I changed my mind. I don't think I should sign. To get a woman to say, would you sign up for Gaza? Sure. Now, we have to read to you. In Gaza, women have no rights. They can't vote. They're not allowed to go out alone. They can't own businesses and so on and so on. Sign right here. What do you mean? Women have no rights in Gaza? Really? I don't want to sign that. So you introduce them to their ignorance. Free from the river to the sea? They'll never be free. They live under Hamas and they're free? Queers for Palestine. I'll buy you a one-way ticket. You walk off the plane, you'll be dead.
Cows for McDonald's.
I'm sorry?
Cows for McDonald's.
I'm not hearing you.
Cows for McDonald's.
Cows for McDonald's, right. That's right. Exactly right. They haven't moved to plant-based meat yet. So they're chanting these slogans, and that way you gently point out, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you are doing. That's all. Yeah.
Is there going to be Q&A after, or should I?
No, no, go ahead, because I'm going to
One of my questions is, they're kind of a two-parter question, is the first would be, does the Rav consider Christianity to be a cult? And the second one is, a lot of the times we claim, we just point out Christianity and say, if you don't believe in Yoshke, you're going to Gehenna, there's nothing else to it, you don't have to be a good person, as long as you believe in Yoshke, you're good to go. So I feel like sometimes in Judaism, we, to an extent, say, if you don't believe in Hashem, and if you don't keep the Shabbat, and if you don't keep this, then it's a similar story. Just as they believe, if you don't believe in Yoshke, you're going to Gehenna, so too we believe somebody who doesn't keep Shabbos is a Rasha, and this, and that. So I'm wondering, how can we differentiate and say we're not like them when there are some similarities?
Well, this is a very important question that comes up all the time. You say, you teach somebody something, the Torah believes in X, you say, but the Christians also believe in X. Okay, now I have something very radical to tell you, something quite surprising. I'm glad you're sitting down. Judaism is not anti-Christianity. That's not what it is. It isn't the thing that is against Christianity. Judaism is what it is. And there might be overlaps. And if they agree with us on something, it means they got something right. And let's congratulate them. We're not here to make ourselves different from them. If they believed in 90% of what we believed in, we'd be very happy for that. It's not a question of being different for the sake of being different. We believe what we believe. We know it's true. And if they agree, that's fine. But for example, the difference between the two, if you believe you're in, if you don't believe you're out, there's a gigantic difference. And that is, for them, if you are raised in deepest, darkest Africa, and you're illiterate, and you never went outside of your village, and you never heard of it, but you don't believe in it, you're damned. As far as Yiddishkeit is concerned, if your beliefs are wrong, it's only because you knew the truth and you rejected it. Being ignorant of it costs you nothing. You can't be punished for being ignorant. Because Baruch Hu is fair. He's fair in moral terms. And in this connection, I don't know if you have heard this famous expression, which is attributed, because it's coming from where you're coming intellectually, attributed to Chaim Brisker, Nebuch an apikoros is oichet an apikoros. I don't know if you've heard that phraseology. Meaning, if a person is an apikoros because he doesn't believe, let's say the Rambam's 13 principles, which he has in Hakdama Perek Chelek, then, and he never heard of them, and he was never brought up with them, gee, it's really a shame, but he's an apikoros, and he's, lost. That's dead wrong. It's dead wrong. Number one, as I heard from Rabbi Meiselman, both of the points I'm going to make I heard from Rabbi Meiselman, the only source that we have for this idea is that Rabbi Chanan says that someone told him that he heard that Rabbi Chaim Brisker said it. That's all. It's not written anywhere, not a letter anywhere, a speech anywhere, or anything else. It's a second-hand report that he said it, which may or may not be true or may not be understood. And number two, Rabbi Meiselman pointed out, that in the Mishnah Torah, when this person is described in Hilchos Tshuva, he's called a Rasha. He's condemned because he's a Rasha. He's wicked. People aren't wicked because they never heard of something. That's not wicked by anybody's definition. Rambam is talking about those principles which, having been acquainted with them and having heard them and lived with them, the person comes to deny them. That's quite a different matter. And the other thing is this, when you talk about what Christianity is, I was once talking about Christianity here, and I said there are hundreds of different Christian sects. And one of the very new boys said to me, "Hey, Rabbi, you're absolutely wrong." I said, "Really? Why?" He said, "Because there are over 1,000. So, sorry, I underestimated it. No question, I shouldn't have done that. There are over 1,000. So you say, what does Christianity do or believe? The answer is whatever you like. The sects are as different from one another as black and white. So some are open and some are less open. Some are really logically argumentative. Some tolerate others. Others don't tolerate others. There's no such thing as the general rule for Christianity. Even within Catholicism, there are significant changes. There's a very fine contemporary philosopher, Peter van Inwagen, who's Catholic, and I had correspondence with him on a number of issues. And I mentioned what's it called? Colloquially, it's called replacement theory. The doctrine is that they are the real Jews. They call themselves Israel. God abandoned us because we violated his covenant with us, and his covenant is with them. And I mentioned that to him, and he said, I was doing this 10 years ago with him, or 15 years ago. He said it's become very controversial, and there's a strong movement in the Catholic Church to reject it. The Anglicans gave it up entirely. The Anglicans specifically have a rule against proselytizing Jews. Judaism is true for Jews. That's what God wants from Jews. And for the rest of the world, they're better off Christian than not. But there's no point in a Jew becoming a Christian because Judaism is what God wants God's Jews to do. So you talk about Christianity, it's a mixed bag. So there's no way to and although accepting the basics of Jewish belief is very important, there are many sources which indicate that questioning them and analyzing them and coming to know them through reasoning is superior. I have this on my blog. There, not only do you have the Chovos Levavos who says it, but the Shloh HaKadosh quotes the Chovos Levavos word for word, and there's a Maharsha, and there's a Beis Elokim, and who else did I find? I'm leaving one out. But those sources are general enough. And the Rambam who says mitzvah leda, the person has to have knowledge, not just belief. And if you tell me, but Rabbi, in Sefer HaMitzvahs, it says lahamin, so then there are two answers to that. Sefer HaMitzvahs is written in Arabic. This is a translation of the Arabic. Rabbi Kapach and Yibat al-Chaim, Rav Heller from before the war, both of whom were experts in Arabic, said that the translation lahamin is inexact. It really means leida, like it means the Mishnah Torah. And even if you think it meant lahamin, the Mishnah Torah is later, and that he wrote in Hebrew, and he says leida. You have to know. Knowing means you have to have reason. You can't treat just something you've received by tradition. It's not enough. Yeah.
So you said that someone who isn't exposed to the ideas and the concept of Judaism, they can't be punished for something that they didn't know of. But let's say a Jew who just totally secular their entire lives. Doesn't Hashem give everybody opportunities and knowledge of Judaism? Like, can we really say that this person was just unfortunate? They never were introduced to a rabbi.
I'm surprised you say that. In Hilchos Mamrim, the famous Rambam says that the Bnei HaKaroim, the Karaites, are Ke'anusim, and therefore they're not responsible for what they do, and therefore you approach them with avosos ahava, with cords of love, and gently try to persuade them to come back to Avihim Sheva Shamayim. But if nobody approaches them, then they're anusim. Onus Rachmana Patre. So, and he's not alone. I don't know anybody who disagrees with him. So we recognize. Rav Dessler writes an article about in Free Will, and he says that a person could be onus on Gneva. Even though Gneva in a certain sense is a rational mitzvah, if he was brought up in a society where he never heard that stealing is wrong, then he's onus on Gneva. Now, Rabbi Hanan says that you can attack an atheist and you can attack him for logic and you can convict him even though he says he doesn't believe in God. So people said, is it a stira? It's not a stira. Rabbi Hanan wasn't dealing with the extreme case that Rabbi Dessler was talking about. They were talking about Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, where it could be you never met a rational person in your lifetime. You just met these cult figures and you never heard that there was anything else to say. So if that's true, And since it is true for some people, so then it's simply not true that the Kodesh Baruch Hu gives everyone the opportunity. Now, if you believe in Gilgul the way the vast majority do, then it's an easy answer. In a previous incarnation or a later incarnation, you'll have it, and you'll have a chance. I was speaking before about the Rambam, for whom we have no information about what he held about reincarnation. I think this is very important. The Rambam, to my knowledge, never mentions it, positively or negatively. The Rambam is not shy. If he thinks that something's a mistake, he says so. Like the 6,000 years is a mistake. And he said Shadim is a mistake, and so forth and so on. And the Rasag heard about it and rejected it, and the Rambam doesn't mention it. So I find his silence curious, very curious. If he had reincarnation, then that would make a lot of things easier to understand in the Rambam. But so I wasn't using that. If you use that, then this idea that a person gets an opportunity would be true in some incarnation or other. He'll get an opportunity. That would be something else. Okay.